pension funds are chasing liabilities and having to basically be these vehicles that play in the big kids sandbox. It's cutthroat and there's no mercy there. I can't imagine a world where the pension goes bust. That's going to send shockwaves through so many different sectors of the economy. I mean, you're talking global impact. If you have a CIO that's incentivized for the fund to do well, they're going to find Bitcoin. The numbers don't lie. Bitcoin's brand is resilience, and that cannot be undone.
What's up, freaks? Sitting down with Dom Bei, running for the Board of Trustees of CalPERS. Dom, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Marty. And what else? What is up, freaks? How's everyone doing today?
I hope everybody's doing well. Vibes are high here. Been vibe coding. The vibes are high because the vibe coding's been up. I vibe coded something last night. Feeling pretty excited.
Nice. What were you working on? Is it a top secret or?
No, I think by the time this episode airs, I'll have released it. But it's simple, very simple product. A browser extension that allows you to put the price of goods that you may or may not be buying in sats alongside dollars, so that you recognize the opportunity cost of purchasing things.
I like that. That's I was working once with a hotel that was looking at doing Bitcoin, like, different Bitcoin stuff, whether it's like putting on the treasury. And one of the things I told them, I was like, you guys should just do a coffee shop where you just have dollar price and sats price just next to each other. It'd be a cool thing, something that we don't see a lot as Bitcoiners, but just to, we all do it. You get that familiarity where you go like, well, what would this be in sats? And it's easy to look up big things, but not little things. So that's really cool, man. That'll be good.
Yeah. And the whole idea is to just have the concept of opportunity cost while you're spending front of mind, while you're shopping on the internet, which I think actually ties in perfectly with what we're here to talk about today with you specifically, is the opportunity costs that exist within pensions that are deploying capital in ways that they have for many decades, and many are missing the Bitcoin boat. Many who haven't spoken to you are missing the Bitcoin boat, and you are taking it upon yourself to try to tackle one of the biggest behemoths in the world of pensions and CalPERS to really drive home this opportunity cost at the pension level.
Yeah, for sure. The outgoing chief investment officer of CalPERS, Nicole Musico, described the 10-year era of private equity that CalPERS missed as the lost decade. It was the pinnacle of private equity, and CalPERS really felt like they didn't have enough capital deployed. And, in past conversations, I've talked about, knowing what we know about Bitcoin and where it's at and where it's going. Are you going to have similar commentary from pensions around the country in 2035 saying, hey, we're going to get into Bitcoin now? We had a lost decade where it was just staring us right in the face, and we didn't really need to do much but learn about it, and we missed the boat. So now, let's learn about it. It'll be time will tell.
Yeah, let's jump into how you got to the point where you decided to run for the Board of Trustees at CalPERS. Let's get into your history as a firefighter, working with the union, and then your advocacy in recent years, going out to public pensions, particularly those of emergency responders, to get Bitcoin within their pension systems, and why you think CalPERS is the next big step for you.
For sure. So I got hired as a firefighter I'm coming up on my 16-year anniversary. I got hired as a firefighter in Santa Monica. And early in my career as a firefighter, someone reached out and said, hey, you're kind of a goofball. You like talking to people. And there's this person on the board who does a lot of our political stuff. He's leaving. You should get with him and kind of learn about what he does and go find out. And so I went with him. First thing he did was bring me to this breakfast with a city council member, and we were talking history in the city. And I just I love that kind of stuff and learning about, the backstories behind whatever's going on and all the moving pieces. And so I ended up getting on our board for the Santa Monica firefighters. and pretty young, doing a lot of the political stuff, ended up becoming the vice president and then became the president of the firefighters, and what was over a 10-year period of serving as an elected board member for the firefighters. Kind of parallel to that and unrelated, I found Bitcoin in 2017, randomly working at a conference, which I forget which conference it was, but I kind of looked back and I think it might have been Consensus. I'm not sure. But this was 2017. And I remember my one takeaway from this conference, which may or may not have been Consensus. And it was this: the people I spoke to there were equally or greater as convicted as any group or constituency I'd ever met in my entire life. That's including firefighters, like any group. The conviction was unmissable. And you could tell the people I talked to there, they would not be convinced otherwise. And at that time, there wasn't as much of a division between the different coins, like there was Ethereum people there and there was Bitcoiners there, but there was a definite, someone got a hold of me and was like, hey, Bitcoin is something that forget all this other stuff. You need to just learn this. And I remember taking that away and kind of got passively involved, wasn't super active in the space. Just kind of learned about it and grabbed a little bit and just kind of did that thing. The board took up a lot of my time. And so another thing that happened while I was on the board was I was appointed to a pension advisory committee for the city of Santa Monica, where we had a full presentation from the board and they came and presented to us and different, not the board, it was different team members. And so I learned a ton about the pension, and I've always I was a history major in college, so I love learning about history, and I started really getting into the history of pensions, which is fascinating. We'll save that for another episode for the sake of your viewers. But started doing that. And when I got off the board, in addition to this random incident where I kind of rescued one of the analysts from Swan in a crazy twist of fate, coincidence, I ended up getting more into Bitcoin and started writing a lot about where is the intersection between workers and wage earners and Bitcoin. And as I dug in, as you know, and your listeners know, the parallels and intersections jump out at you tremendously. And even though I have some financial background from my work, Bitcoin made me dig into the legacy financial structure more than any other medium that I've encountered in my life, including digging even deeper into pensions and writing. One of the first articles I wrote about was about the pension systems, and very exploratory, not trying to sell anything, but together, what do we have in front of us? What's here? And so got much more involved, ended up helping the Santa Monica firefighters become the first union to hold Bitcoin on the balance sheet in self-custody in the nation. And for the listeners, that's not, again, unions have their own funds. That's not pension money. That's just money that they get from dues that they hold collectively, within their own organization. Following that and what I've witnessed and the power of that experience, I started a nonprofit called Proof of Workforce. And since we have helped 10 different unions across the public and private sectors learn about Bitcoin and also, learn how to hold Bitcoin on the balance sheet. I spoke with a few of the board of trustees from the Wisconsin Pension Fund and had them on a show where we explored Bitcoin and kind of just had a very open, candid conversation about it. I like to think that we played a very small but kind of cool pivotal role in Wisconsin being the first pension in the U.S. to buy the ETF in size. Not the first pension to add Bitcoin to its balance sheet. That I'm pretty sure ends up with Houston, even though there was other pension funds in the Bay Area, and I know Pomp had a fund or something in the East Coast where they ended up investing in a fund by proxy holding Bitcoin. But yeah, started doing that, and I've never been someone to say that Bitcoin will save pension funds, but I think that Bitcoin poses a lot of questions and forces us to look at the structure of pensions that could save pension funds. And it's going to take a lot, but I'm a doer, and I saw the opportunity to run for a pension that I'm a part of. And I'm like, hey, I'm not just going to be someone that writes about pensions. Like, I'm going to put my neck on the line and go out there and try to run for the pension board to use whatever, little talent I have, but a lot of hard work to try to make a change and make a positive impact to the pension fund. So that's kind of my path, in short.
Listen, freaks, I know you're tired of me talking about Fold, but I'm going to beat the drum. I'm going to beat the dead horse. If you're a Bitcoiner living in the United States and you're not using Fold, I'm just going to ask one question. What are you doing? You're leaving sats on the table. They've got gift cards. They've got their debit card. You can use your credit card. Just connect your credit card to the Fold app. Use the Fold app to pay off your credit card, and you're going to stack your credit card points and Bitcoin as well. They even teamed up with Crowd Health to give their members Fold Plus membership at no cost. Don't leave sats on the table. Go sign up for Fold today. Go to tftc.io/fold. There's nothing to lose except sats that you could have stacked. Sup, freaks? This rip of TFTC was brought to you by our good friends at Bitkey. Bitkey makes Bitcoin easy to use and hard to lose. It is a hardware wallet that natively embeds into a 2 or 3 multi-sig. You have one key on the hardware wallet, one key on your mobile device, and Block stores a key in the cloud for you. This is an incredible hardware device for your friends and family, or maybe yourself, who have Bitcoin on exchanges and have for a long time, but haven't taken the step to self-custody because they're worried about the complications of setting up a private public key pair, securing that seed phrase, setting up a PIN, setting up a passphrase. Again, Bitkey makes it easy to use, hard to lose. It's the easiest 0 to 1 step, your first step to self-custody. If you have friends and family on the exchanges who haven't moved it off, tell them to pick up a Bitkey. Go to bitkey.world, use the key TFTC20 at checkout for 20% off your order. That's bitkey.world, code TFTC20. I know you said that we could do a whole episode on it, but I think we should touch on it. Your dive into the history of pensions and how they've evolved over the years and how they're structured. But I think this is a base setting for the listeners based off of your understanding. Like,
yeah,
what does the evolution of pensions broadly look like, and what problems have amassed over time?
Yeah. So this, random trivia stuff, but do you know the first funding mechanism for the first pension off the top of your head?
No.
Okay. I didn't either, but basically the first pension was a naval pension. It was a military pension. The first funding mechanism was confiscated boats and ships and property throughout warfare. Pretty crazy. So the first, the first pension funding mechanism was based on theft. Hard stop. Like, that's just a science. That's not an opinion or anything like that. But there was incentive, which, Bitcoin's taught us a lot about incentives, and I'm huge on incentives. And that's something that Bitcoin has taught me better than anything else, is like, incentives are everything. And so, naval officers and folks at sea in war had an incentive to, be better at warfare because they were funding their future disability pension. Started very small. Moved to the first municipal pension over years in New York, which was the police pension in New York, was the first municipal pension of its kind. And that was funded with some interesting things, but the basic funding structure of like bonds, they had funding in the beginning of like confiscated property. They had this thing called Sunday fines. I haven't looked too much into this, but there used to be a list of stuff you couldn't do on Sunday, like probably, I don't know, gambling, selling stuff. I don't know what the list was, but the police would fine you for doing stuff on Sunday that was on the list. And those would go towards the pension fund. And I'm laughing because I'm just imagining being like a cop the morning of work, and you're like, "Hey, how's the pension looking?" Like, dude, we're gonna hit some folks up today, and drop some fines. But they became more stable and very simplistic in structure at the beginning, which was just have a funding mechanism that was something like treasury bonds, municipal bonds, to fund a modest amount of money for a worker when they retired. Fast forward, right? I'll spare the listener the whole progression of all the things that happened, but there was many pension funds that went bankrupt, and then you have oversight, and then you have different funds used to be overseen by folks that didn't have the best interest, right? Many cycles, these things have played out, and then you have regulatory stuff. But if you fast forward, we now have CalPERS, the largest pension in the United States, with a 17% allocation to private equity. Some would say very far from where pensions started in their structure, right? Where now pension funds are chasing liabilities and having to basically be these vehicles that play, in the big kids sandbox as far as finance. I mean, private equity, it's cutthroat, and there's no mercy there. It's profits, and pensions have transformed into something that's definitely quite a ways off from what they started as.
No, and you were mentioning before we hit record too, the lost decade that CalPERS had by not allocating to private equity, and the outgoing CIO mentioned that this was a problem, that an opportunity that they didn't take advantage of. And I think today, as it stands, look at the landscape of private equity. They may have gotten into it a little late too, because of the dynamics that exist post COVID monetary base expansion. That's, I think, private equity venture, as somebody who runs a venture fund, the whole sector is being looked at with a side eye right now, because there's been a ton of capital allocated into early stage companies and later stage companies, but that capital hasn't been returned to LPs in many cases, which is a big problem for that sector. And so you have pensions making these illiquid investments that right now, at least, who knows, that seems to be changing with the new administration, companies going public, mergers and acquisitions back on the table. But you have this sort of liability mismatch in these illiquid investments that puts these pensions in a tough spot.
Yeah, it's a lot of people that are there's a ton of people out there, Marty. We know that their foundation for their understanding of Bitcoin is mainstream media. We also know that mainstream media embarked on, without a doubt, a heavily slanted negative campaign on Bitcoin for over a decade. That's just, once again, it's math. Anyone can say, Dom, you just like Bitcoin. I go, then run a story number count on negative headlines versus positive for Bitcoin over the past 10 years, and you sort the math for yourself. And when it comes back 75 to 80% plus negative, then just tell me, I don't know, whatever. But that's a fact. And so, of course, they're conditioned to view Bitcoin as this very risky thing. For those of us that understand markets, which I'm not claiming to be one of those people, but, I'm getting better every day. Private equity is a very, very, cutthroat field. And you can win and do very well, and you can also get wrecked. And one of the issues that has come up as I've spoken to different retirees and different folks is the ambiguity of private equity. I think about the transparency of Bitcoin and the fact that, it's audited 24/7. You can see where Bitcoin is, and what it is, and you can see what's happening with the network. Private equity is a fund where they're making a lot of moves and they're balancing the ledger, and they have winners and losers, and they're making it all work out. But there is not just a delayed reporting time to public equities, but there's a lot of ambiguity. And so when you think about the history of a pension, to just hold some simple municipal bonds to pay some money out to workers when they retire, to now being in this kind of ambiguous investment realm with what I would describe as severely lacking incentives for an investment team and CIO, you have an interesting dynamic that leads to continued underperformance.
Yeah, it's a shame. And I think you can tie this all back to the nature of the high velocity trash economy that's been incentivized by the fiat monetary system. Like, these pensions are forced to go out further on the risk curve to produce the returns necessary to pay out the pensioners at the end of the day when they retire. And I think, as it stands, you mentioned CalPERS is the biggest pension in the United States, public pension in the United States. I think CalPERS and the Illinois pension are the two that many point to and say these are massive entities, number one, and they could become massive problems if you just look at how big they are, what they're promising in terms of payouts to pensioners and how much money they actually have. There's some shortfalls that exist. So I think as it relates to CalPERS specifically, let's just give your high level state of the union of the state of the pension.
Yeah. So, like you mentioned, and it made me think of the pension issues a lot stemmed from 07, 08. The average funding status for a local and state pension throughout the country, the average funded status was in the low 90s prior to the financial crisis in 08. Afterwards, the average funded status was below 80%. We talk about the origins of a pension. They were not created to play catch up. That's not what the fund was created for. They were created to be these slow moving, large funds that earn steady returns, don't take much risk, and are able to keep up and pay the retirements, which is a very, sacred thing. People trade 30, as we learn more about money, wealth managers will tell you trading your time for money is the worst deal in the world. Find things that earn you money while you sleep. And okay, well, most of the people in the world trade their time for money. And a lot of them pay into these systems with the hope that after trading a whole lifetime where they could have done anything, and that's on us as workers, we could do anything in this world, but we choose to work and go to work and check in, check out. And hopefully at the end, we could spend those years, whether it's like 55 to 60, without having to work. Our backs are a little jammed up and we got ailments and we're injured, but we could spend that time with family, grandkids maybe. And so, right, it's a sacred thing, shouldn't be risky. The state of things right now is, how does the fund catch up? And the biggest thing that I've seen as to why I'm running for the fund is the incentive structure is not made to do that. CalPERS has had 4 chief investment officers over the last just over 5 years. That's an insane turnaround. And when you look at the incentives, I think the CIO is paid $700K a year, which for the public sector, wow, that's a nice salary. For managing, a $500 billion plus portfolio and having to catch up with massive returns steadily on a year by year basis, that's not feasible. Those incentives have to be aligned incredibly well to the long-term performance of the fund. That's something that I really want to focus on if I get on the CalPERS board, is to look at the incentives. How do we attract top-level CIOs that, I get it, there's going to be something if Marty Bent is a top recruit out of his, school and went to one of the best schools and learned about money, there's a good chance you're going to go to BlackRock, Fidelity, one of these big hedge funds or some other fund. But maybe your dad or your uncle was a firefighter and you go, you know what? Like, I just feel called maybe to do a little something different and I want to go to CalPERS. You're taking a sacrifice. We're not going to ever pay you as much as you could make at Fidelity or BlackRock. But if it's my decision, we're going to pay you pretty solid to where you can at least get a house, anywhere in the country if you lead CalPERS to a 10-year plus run of positive returns. I want you to, walk into any private members club and hold your head high if that's your thing. And, as you should, right? For doing something that's incredibly difficult and challenging. So the state of the pension fund right now, I think there's some incentives that are broken. The fund is at 75% funded right now. I don't know if you saw the headlines, but throughout this tariff mania, they say that the fund had a $26 billion markdown, which, if my math is correct, would bring the fund closer towards the 70% funded number. I'm sure they're going to claw some of that back, and they have to before the reporting period on June 30th, 2025. But if not, You're going to have the similar thing that happens always when a pension comes back underfunded. Your cities and your taxpayers are going to have to pay more and fit the bill for that. And that's going to be funds taken away from things like parks, schools, transportation, public safety, stuff like that. And eventually, then that triggers folks to get upset and they go, these damn workers, they're making so much. We need them to retire later and we need them to pay into the system more than they are right now, because that's the problem. When in reality, the performance of a fund is like 60 to 70% correlated to its ability to pay off its liabilities. And proof in the pudding for that is CalPERS did a pension reform in 2013 where they pushed back the retirement ages and made people pay more. And guess what? They haven't caught up. So if the problem is that workers are making too much money, which I'm not saying that doesn't play into the fund, it 100% does. Why didn't the pension reform work in 2013? And in 2025, we sit at a similar place to where we were 12 years prior to the reform. And I'll tell you why. It's because no one's getting to the real, heart of the issue, which is like why our fund is not performing enough, or what it's going to do to play catch up after what happened in the financial crisis.
Yeah, that CIO stat is pretty insane. It's
insane.
That turnover rate makes one wonder, like, is that turnover that high because those individuals don't want to be the one, quote unquote, holding the bag when things go bust? And
yeah, I mean, that's even like, that is a suitcase CIO to the next level, right? Like, how do you don't even start to get into understanding the organization and all of its different, nuts and bolts and pieces until what, like 6 months in. And as you're kind of developing strategies, this isn't like you're going to run the third grade T-ball snack bar. Like, you're running a major, massive organization that gets pulled into all kinds of political issues, and it's complex. And maybe Marty, they leave because, they have to deal with people trying to get them to divest from oil and gas, which happens to be one of the top performers of the fund. And they're going, man, I can't win. Like, you want me to pull out of the one thing that's keeping us funded? Maybe there's some kind of dysfunction in the mechanism of the pension as far as how the board interacts with the investment team, how the CEO interacts with the board and the constituents and the elected officials. But that is a staggering number that cannot be ignored. And, for anyone that says like that alone, forget about the funding status, that there isn't an issue there, that's just crazy. I mean, there's no situation in the world where I can tell you the primary leadership, rotates almost every year and there's not a problem there. No, nothing. Not a union, not a church, not a school. That is going to make problems. So that is something that has to be addressed without a doubt.
Our good friends, Parker Lewis and Drew Bonsall, are two of the deepest thinkers in Bitcoin. While they come from very different backgrounds, they've landed on the exact same conclusion. It's Bitcoin that matters, not crypto. This masterclass lays out why 21 million is the key breakthrough, how Bitcoin, not blockchain, creates decentralization, and why everything else will be built on Bitcoin. Understand why Bitcoin works and why nothing else does. Watch the premiere at unchained.com/TFTC. That's unchained.com/TFTC. So has CalPERS been highly politicized, which is clouding their investment judgment, in your opinion?
I think for sure. And I think, if you, to answer that, just Google CalPERS and look at the top stories. You'll see stories about pressure to divest from oil and gas into energy transition. You'll see that CalPERS has committed $100 billion by 2030 to invest in energy transition and sustainable climate investments. You'll see things like CalPERS getting into like Elon Musk's, pay bonuses and different things like that. People upset that, maybe the pension may or may not hold something that has to do with Musk, right? These are political things for sure. There's a decent amount, California is a very political place. So it doesn't surprise me that there's, that it's a politicized pension fund, but that's where the incentives come up, right? And that's where if you have a CIO that's strongly incentivized by fund performance, You should have a board that's strongly incentivized by fund performance. You should have elected officials that are strongly incentivized by fund performance, city leaders, everyone. You have to ask the question in everything, is this going to fulfill our ultimate goal, which is to pay the retirees, keep a healthy workforce, and not hold cities hostage to these unfunded liability payments that they have to make if our fund drops below? You can invest in anything in the world, but if it doesn't pass that litmus test, you do not pass go. You do not collect 200. It could be the most sincere thing in the world and a great cause. And that's all great. But like someone once told me, if it doesn't make money today, it may never make money. And you have to really, you can't invest in things because you think we're going to change the world and shape things, and then our investment will make money. That's a very dangerous place to be with, the pension money of the largest, workforce of the nation.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the stats here, my research. CalPERS has 2 million members that are depending on these pensions. And so when you think about politicizing a fund with the responsibility of making sure that 2 million people can sustain their lifestyles and just simply subsist in their retirement years, it's pretty insane. The scale of that, it's more than half a percentage point of the American population.
It's wild. Here's another stat. Did you know that CalPERS is the largest purchaser of medical insurance behind the United States government?
No, I did not.
Yeah, fact. So they provide a lot of medical benefits, and a lot of people use that system as a mechanism for medical benefits, and kind of interfacing with Medicare and all that. So yeah, it's a huge system. And like you said, it's not just, we hear the term too big to fail. I mean, I can't imagine a world where, the pension goes bust, because that's going to send shockwaves through so many different sectors of the economy. I mean, you're talking global impact of the fund. But we say never, and that could never happen. Never say never. I'm not a fear monger. I'm not telling people, the fund's going to collapse and all this stuff. It's more the subtle things like we talked about, like the rotation of the CIOs, the remain being at that underfunded status at like 75% and not seeing that progress. Those are things that are issues. And could the fund have a bigger problem? Sure. I mean, we think about pension bailouts. I don't know if you've noticed this, but like pension bailouts ever since COVID and since the Biden administration bailed out a ton of private pensions with billions that, by the way, are continuing to be paid off today. They don't make the news anymore even. You can look this up. Just look up look up the fund, the pension guaranteed, the guarantor corporation and the funds that they're paying out. They don't make the news, and CalPERS in a way is almost like it's front bailed out, if that makes sense. And so you can look up Newsom took a lot of money that they got during everything that happened with COVID, and they used it to pay down the liabilities and infuse money into CalPERS. And still we sit at 75% today. And if we have bad numbers this June, we'll be below. And so in a way, it is getting bailed out on a regular basis. We talk about the financial system and debt, and at some point, does it break? Does it crack? I don't know. But, there's vulnerabilities there for sure.
Yeah, and let's not focus on the negatives. Let's turn to positives. How do you think Bitcoin should, or let's reframe this. How should CalPERS think about approaching Bitcoin first, from like exploratory, like what is it?
Yeah.
And then like how they can begin to implement it into what they're doing.
Yeah. So, in everything I've done, I'm huge on education, and Bitcoin is an educational tool. Number one, first and foremost, I think the power of Bitcoin in that capacity is unbelievable to serve as an interesting, new, amazing technology where a worker and wage earner can learn about trading their time for money, how it works, etc. So from a standpoint, let's start not with the board and the people that oversee the pension. Let's start with the participants. I'm a huge I'm a huge advocate of learning about Bitcoin because they will inevitably learn about their pension. They will learn about how money works. They will learn about trading time for wages. They'll learn about inflation. They'll learn about, COLA, cost of living adjustments and whether it's enough or not, and medical premiums. So I think CalPERS could be a huge leader in the space in just providing educational materials to their members, right? I think for sure they should have solid research on the books in Bitcoin. And I think when they're looking at it, and if they find that it could fit somewhere, I'm also a huge, huge believer in small incremental steps. It's funny. I talk to these organizations, and if you look me up, what do you think I get when I go talk to like a retiree organization? They'll say, Dom, we saw online, you're the crypto guy. And I go, well, first, Bitcoin is very different from crypto. So we have to start there. It is its own thing. And, those are very different things. Second, look up anything I've ever talked about and the work I've done with unions. I've always been a firm believer in you have to educate folks and take very small steps because as we know, Bitcoin can be volatile over the years, especially in short periods of time. So I would never, some people would say, well, you're running for CalPERS to just add Bitcoin to the balance sheet. No, not quite that simple. I wouldn't, I also am fully aware that if I run for this fund, I represent, like you said, Marty, 2 million plus people. They need to be comfortable with it as well because we know that if a CIO decided to invest in Bitcoin and it had a 30 to 40% drawdown, that CIO is going to get cooked. The pitchforks are going to come out. Look what you did. You gambled with these people's money. Even if the CIO says, hey, everyone, wait. This thing long-term is undefeated. Just give it time and you're going to be good. Doesn't matter. So, because it's new and because it has a lot of misinformation, the education has to, it has to precede or front run any kind of step. And that's education of the participants, education of the staff, the board, investment team, et cetera. I think that's very important. And again, another thing folks don't realize is as a board member, we don't make actual investments. So when we talk about incentives, if you have a CIO that's incentivized for the fund to do well, they're going to find Bitcoin on their own. They don't need me. They don't need you. They're going to find Bitcoin because the numbers don't lie. And the performance of Bitcoin since its inception doesn't lie. It's a true story. I mean, we see today, right, GDP dropped 0.3% or came back lower than expected. And what's Bitcoin at, like 93 or something? And people probably look at it from the highs, but I mean, I know I was at a conference a while ago and Bitcoin was like 85, 88. And if someone mentioned that it kind of feels like a bear market and, you tell us that years ago that Bitcoin's going to kind of feel like boring and a little solemn at 88. And we'd be like, what? Like, and so, ultimately, I think Bitcoin has huge potential as an educational tool for participants of a pension. It's a way to engage people. Here's a stat for you, not to get off topic, but of those 2 million people, do you know how many voted in the 2021 CalPERS board election?
I do not.
10%. So 196,000 voters out of 2 million voted for their own pension. Now, I bet you last year and coming up this year, those same 2 million are probably very high propensity voters in the general election and voted in the presidential election thinking my life is on the line. I got to figure out, they were stressed at home. Like, if I don't get this one right with the president, I just, everyone's torn. I got to nail this. Didn't vote for their own pension fund where decisions will be made that will 1000% determine their future very intimately, regarding the lifeblood of their existence when they retire. Didn't vote. So Bitcoin can be, if my campaign does anything, it will be to engage those folks in their pension and learn about it. And I think Bitcoin's an interesting tool, whether people hate it or like it, if they, whatever their opinion, it's a good engagement mechanism and it gets people excited. and it has a good brand of resilience, and it's just an interesting thing. So that's my take as far as, Bitcoin and pensions. It's not as simple as like CalPERS is not going to add Bitcoin and then its problems are over. It saves the world. But it can surely look at it as a tool. And another thing I told the retirees, another fact, look up the top 10 most valuable assets on the planet Earth, and you'll see Bitcoin in the top 10. Hard stop. End of story. You tell me that you're going to be the largest pension and you're not going to have a pro forma report or research done on one of the top 10 assets on planet Earth, and you're sitting underfunded at 75% with turnover of like a CIO a year. I can't even have the conversation. If you know what I mean, like I can't have the conversation. Surely they're going to do research on the other top 10. Why exclude Bitcoin? And we know the answer. It's because mainstream media has driven. They did a hell of a job, Marty. I got to give it to you. Whoever runs mainstream media, if I could hire them for my campaign, whoever did the negative media on Bitcoin, I need to hire them because they did an amazing job. But that's starting to change now that you have the ETF was a huge thing. And people, they're starting to come around being like, the news has told me Bitcoin is dead 10 times. And I just keep looking and I don't know what's up.
Every 2 years I look at the chart and it's higher than it was when they told me it died. It's insane.
Exactly. It's Bitcoin's brand of resilience is cemented now in history. That is undebatable. Bitcoin has embraced multiple attacks, calamities, bad actors that have given, Bitcoin a bad name that haven't even touched Bitcoin, mainstream media, all out assault. And Bitcoin's brand is resilience, and that cannot be undone. That is fixed in history because it has a track record, and that doesn't change. And so, what's this stat? No asset that's ever crossed $1 trillion in market cap has ever went to zero.
I haven't heard that one, but that wouldn't shock me at all.
I don't know if it's true, so don't quote me on it, but I heard someone mention it. But it seems to make sense. Like, sure, it may fall out of grace with the top 10 or top 20, but once it's kind of crossed that threshold, there's always going to be someone that sees Bitcoin as an opportunity and a value play because of its brand ID and resilience.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think Bitcoin's resilience is stamped in terms of there's no denying it's died 1,000 deaths and come back stronger every time. And on that note, I think more and more people are beginning to recognize this and get over the cognitive dissonance that has been embedded in their minds via the malware of mainstream media and begin to say, hey, these guys have been telling me the wrong thing for many years now. And I guess to that point, in your experience talking to unions and pensions throughout the years and your focus on education, what has been the most effective type of educational engagement? Is it literal information about Bitcoin on a pamphlet? Is it going and talking to people? Is it pointing at charts and showing results, different flavors for different people?
I think some of the most useful and effective mechanisms, I always tell folks this when I talk to different unions that are looking to get their unions to start. They always call and they go, I'm going to get my union to make a big allocation to Bitcoin. I go, hold on. It's funny because some people, who did a hit piece on me the other day? Joel Silverman, the co-author of Easy Money with Ben McKenzie. Remember that book?
Yeah.
The guy from the OC. Mm-hmm. He did a hit piece where he painted my incredibly poor and humble nonprofit that has not much money to its name as this, we're going around talking to unions and selling them on this religious Bitcoin, and you need to do all, and I'll send it to you. You'll get a good laugh out of it. it was in the nation. So I was a very proud moment.
Logan, find it and put it on the screen while we're talking about it here.
Yeah. But in reality, it's ironic because I talk a lot of unions out of making big buys of Bitcoin, right? They come to me and they say, we want to do this big thing. And I go, hey, hold on a second. Like, you're going to get yourself into a bad situation. You need to really, if you're going to do this, learn about it, be smart. Don't take unnecessary risk. And so when dealing with a board, which is, you think it's hard enough to convince one person of like doing anything. When you convince a group body that has a large collective of different thoughts and opinions, and that body is a democratic body that can move and sway and have extremists kind of take over the mood, or maybe people on one side or the other, you really have to thread the needle perfectly and make sure that you involve everyone. And so one of the most effective tools that I've used is helping people convince, whoever is in position of authority in their organization. You don't need to figure out if Bitcoin is good for you or not. You just need to figure out if it's worth finding out whether it is or not. And I tell groups this all the time. They go, yeah, the president of the union I think he's kind of anti-union. And so I don't think he's going to go for this. And I go, you don't need to sell him on Bitcoin. You just need to sell him on the fact that Bitcoin is worth looking into. And from there, the fear melts away, because it's scary. And I get it. Folks they just want to cruise along, and they don't want to get attacked. They worked hard to get in their spots. And so I would say the same thing is true for a pension. I don't need to convince a pension that Bitcoin is worth adding to the balance sheet. I would only ever convince a pension that it's worth looking into. And what's the harm in that? I mean, if CalPERS did some pro forma thing, are they going to get, at that point, if someone gets attacked for simply learning or looking into something, the problem is on the attacker for sure. I mean, unless that thing is so atrocious that you're like, this is like, it's the thing itself is extremely harmful to people around them, right? Which Bitcoin is not. And so, just getting them to look into that's really effective. Small incremental steps, because they melt away the fear. And just meeting people, it's a little cliche. You hear about meeting people where they're at, but it's so true. If I'm talking to you and you tell me, I don't like Bitcoin because people lose their seed phrase, I could choose to counter that by saying, well, only a small amount of people lose their seed phrase, and actually it doesn't really happen and it's very uncommon. Or I can say, Marty, you know what? You're right. People do lose their seed phrase. But what if we started with $5 and playing with self-custody and what it felt like? Would you be worried about losing the seed phrase? No, I guess then, I wouldn't really care. Okay, great. Now, are you good with that? Yeah, I'm good. But what about, there's all these hackers? And I go, well, listen, Bitcoin has never been hacked. Any kind of issue has been through someone's own mistake. But what if we started with $5? Could you get over the fact that, sure, Bitcoin might be able to be hacked? Could you engage then? Yes. And then when holding it, they learn, oh my gosh, I could see I would never lose my seed phrase. Or if I did, I'd get into multi-sig or some other, joint custodial thing where I had better insurances if I did more. So that's been the most effective couple of tools that I've used. And then the last one is consensus. You can't do these things in the dark. You got to be out in the open and get people involved, because if you don't get people involved, you're running the chance of a Bitcoin hitting, a volatile stretch and having some downtime. And then you're not going to be in it for the long run because people are going to attack that. And you also lose on what I think is one of the greatest facets of Bitcoin, which is its ability to educate workers and wage earners on how money works. Why? That's the best part. So include everyone and take advantage of what is one of the best things about Bitcoin. Whether you end up passing some measure and getting involved, or if your organization says that's not for us, but we learned a lot, but it's not for us. Great.
Yeah, and then the individuals, maybe the organization doesn't do it, but the individuals are like, you know what, I'm going to do this myself and help themselves out, less dependent on the pension on the back end. And I completely agree, not only with meeting people where they are, but the first step should just be convincing them to look into Bitcoin. And your story there reminded me a lot of my days at Great American Mining, where we would do these webinars. We'd send out a message like, if you're in oil and gas, we're doing a webinar on using Bitcoin mining to eliminate flare gas problems that you may have. And what we found, it was a bunch of younger, either analysts or middle managers that were joining the call. And there were like Bitcoiners in these organizations that really understood it. And that was a lot of the conversation we had was with these lower level people in the organization, having conversations about how they can broach the conversation with the decision makers on the investment board or the management team. And a lot of it was just like convince them that Bitcoin is worth looking into. And then, like you mentioned, it'll do the job after that.
Exactly. Yeah. It's interesting not to get sidetracked, because that's spot on. You mentioned the mining side of stuff. And I do think there's a very interesting dynamic in California right now, in that, right, you had a change of the administration, and you had this huge public-private partnership in energy transition, right? Renewable energy. And like I mentioned earlier, CalPERS committed $100 billion by 2030. Now, they hold some things. There's also some controversies like, you can't list Exxon as part of your climate friendly investment, and they go, well, if we're impacting change, then we view it as such. But the big thing is that with the changing administration that seems to now be incentivizing, oil and gas, drill, baby, drill, you have a huge amount of the private sector on that public-private that is pulling away from energy transition. I saw an article that BP was looking to sell or liquidate huge holdings in energy transition, whether that's like investments in solar or wind. That leaves, I don't know if you saw this, but Governor Newsom went to Sonora, Mexico, and there was an article that came out, our new climate partner, Sonora. And I was like, okay, I don't know where they were in the list of like, top like huge, making a huge splash, but I'm sure there's some great stuff there. But what is California going to do to succeed at its goal of energy transition? And, there's a lot of people in the space in Bitcoin where there is heavy pursuit of renewable energy as a source. And we know Bitcoin miners will pursue whatever. They work off incentives, and that is an incredibly cutthroat field. And so if you provide them an energy source that can give them an advantage of, tiny little bit, they will jump on it and set up shop. And there's a lot of interesting things there with California as far as what role could Bitcoin play as an energy partner and whatever. I'm not an energy expert, so there's a lot of variables and question marks, but surely it maybe is worth exploring.
Yeah. Bitcoin miners, the buyer of first and last resort of your energy resources, looking to expand generation, whether that's wind, solar, nuclear, oil and gas, coal, even. Bitcoin miners can be there as the buyer first resort as you put the generation asset down and wait for the transmission lines to be built out. Once the transmission lines are built out, Bitcoin miners can unplug, move somewhere else, rinse and repeat. You look up a couple decades from now, and you have a pretty robust energy system with a ton of generation that's being utilized to max capacity. It's a beautiful thing. California, think about it.
Imagine the irony if Bitcoin ended up being, a key player in succeeding in energy transition and goals. I mean, the irony would just be unbelievable.
Well, Ben McKenzie told me it's boiling the ocean, so I don't think we should explore it.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's if that's the case. You always know it's an issue where you're like on all the talk shows and you have a thesis, and then the thesis is wildly wrong and you just disappear. And you're like, all right, I'm out. But yeah, no, some really interesting stuff there for California. And I think we had a little thing in Santa Monica, which was like this like peer-to-peer little street festival that we did. And we had Margot from BPI was there. And she was talking to a state senator about the different energy stuff. And they had a good conversation about how there's a little bit different standards or views on, Bitcoin miners versus traditional database operators. And there's just a lot there. And I hope that the state can facilitate a deeper exploration of that, because if the ultimate goal is just to, have energy transition and move more into renewables, then it's worth looking into whether Bitcoin can help achieve that or not. And if the answer is no, then fine, they looked into it, but better than not succeeding at the goal.
You're going to have to get some Californian representatives in West Texas. That would be very interesting to see. Look at all this wind and solar generation that Bitcoin mining has helped produce.
Yeah, if they're allowed to step foot in Texas, we got to put. Hopefully, there's more bipartisan. That's another thing with my race that's huge. Is like the pension thing is not partisan, and so I'm really hoping to engage folks, because there should be no partisan issues in the pension fund. It affects all cities equally, all workers up and down the state, and it should not be a politicized thing. So, but easier said than done.
Agreed. And great segue into the topic of how does one actually run for the board of trustees of CalPERS? What are the mechanics? How does the politics of CalPERS actually work? Yeah.
So to run, the board of administration, or I call it the board of trustees, even though there is a slight difference between the term, but it's just more understandable. And the Constitution mentions trustees and administration, but the retirement board consists of 13 individuals. Some of them are ex facto. So like the California treasurer, right, may have a spot on there. Some of them are appointed by the governor or assembly, speaker of the assembly or Senate. And then there's some that are at large for election. So I'm running for one of the spots that's an at large spot. How do I run for it? I'm eligible because I'm an active member of CalPERS myself. I'm a firefighter in the state that's in that system. And so I'm an eligible voter, and I'm eligible to run for the spot. I have to get these signatures to be eligible, which I'm got those. And then I have to run and find a way to communicate and turn out 2 million plus voters that are not part of any district. They're just distributed throughout the entire state. So the answer to how do you do it, it's tough. And these spots are often, gatekept by different, larger organizations or unions that have more members. And so it's incredibly challenging without the support of the big unions that can then turn out their members, because it's really expensive. I mean, just running 2 million plus voters is the size of it's a congressional race easily, if not bigger. But imagine there's no district. A congressional race, at least you have a district where if you hit everyone within the district lines, you hit a voter. I have to literally hit every person in California, in order to reach the 2 million, or I have to be really strategic in finding them. So putting together a digital campaign, it's super expensive and it's very hard. And so if I'm unable to raise the money, which I'm working on 24/7, then I cannot communicate with the voters. I got good endorsements from firefighters across the state. So I'll be, they've been incredible, reaching out saying, we're going to get the word out. We'll get the word out to our local city, our local organizations. So that's a beautiful community that I'm very blessed to be a part of. I'm just going to have to run really hard before these ballots come in. August 29th, the 2 million voters get the ballots. They have a month to vote, either sending it in online or by phone. And then they'll tally the results. And if there's a clear winner, they'll be on the board. Otherwise, they'll move to a runoff a few months later. So that is the incredible task at hand. While we're talking about it, let's talk about a couple things on why it matters to the viewer, if I can. I think it matters because it's a big deal. Like we mentioned, there's 2 million plus folks that rely on these retirement funds. I think it's a huge opportunity to educate those folks and get them engaged. When you do not have engagement from your everyday folks, it allows a few loud voices to kind of dominate the political discussion, and that can impact, anything in a variety of ways. So engagement is huge. For Bitcoiners, I think it matters because everyone knows how I feel about Bitcoin, and I believe in it personally. Of course, as a board member, I serve 2 million plus workers, and that's going to be my priority. But I'm huge on education, and I think it's a huge opportunity to, have a pillar of education in that area in California, in Sacramento. So I think that will lead to tons of great discussions there. And again, as we saw in the news, California is now the 4th largest economy in the world. So when you talk about, areas that maybe are a little behind in their understanding, that's a huge, huge territory. So I think that matters. And then there's something that's very interesting where, Marty, your listener in like Nebraska or Oklahoma or Texas or North Dakota might be like, I don't care about CalPERS. Well, a lot of different political folks I've talked to believe that there's a decent possibility that the future of the House could be determined in California in 2026. And for anyone paying attention to the national politics, I think we've made a lot of progress in just being recognized as having the right to exist as Bitcoiners. If there was something that the last administration really dropped the ball on, they could have simply just said like, hey, we think that folks that are into Bitcoin, have a valid use case, and we're going to learn more about that. And that's all at this time. And they would have been like, thank you. Oh my gosh, millions of people that hold Bitcoin kind of feel like seen or recognized. That didn't happen. But with what's on the table for 2026, the Dems are still catching up on Bitcoin, and it's still yet to be determined their kind of stance on it. And so I'm going to be engaging with 2 million plus high propensity general election voters throughout the entire state that will likely determine the future of the House of Representatives. Now, sure, they're going to get engaged on party lines, but wouldn't it be great if they also looked into things like, where different elected officials stand on the future of money and how digital cash might play into our system in the future? And that was a key item. And that could play a role in the election. And, I think every Bitcoiner wants to continue to see progress made and have an ability to just engage in something that they feel protects them from, the wealth extractors of traditional finance. And so that's a very, very big deal. And so I encourage folks to really pay attention and come on board to this campaign that I'm running, because it will be a preface for the midterm elections in 2026, without a doubt. We have a huge opportunity to educate workers and wage earners.
Yeah, and we've got a great distributed network of memers in the Bitcoin space. If we got an underdog running for the board of administrators, board of trustees of CalPERS, we should help crowdsource some marketing efforts. I think we can do a better job than an agency that's taking in millions of dollars to do this. I think we can do this distributed using social media. We've seen the power of memeing Bitcoin into the conversation at the national stage. And that's one thing I've been passionate about for many years, going back to my days at Great American Mining. I became wholly convinced, and still am to a very large extent today, that states are still going to lead the way here. What's happening at the federal level in terms of Bitcoin being part of the conversation, and the Trump administration seriously considering incorporating Bitcoin into what they're doing is all fine and good. But as we know, as Americans, the political gridlock that exists in DC is pretty immense. And I think 33 years into my life, almost 34 years, it's become clear to me, don't depend on that. Much more effective to focus on your local area, your local community, your local union, and build out from there. And states are obviously at a lower layer than the federal government and are very high leverage entities to convince to consider Bitcoin, just to consider Bitcoin.
100%. When we have all these state bills out right now, and look, whether they pass or not. I've always said, you know, we Bitcoiners have leapfrogged a ton of stuff, and I give the community all the credit and everyone working their tail off. I mean, it's unbelievable. But like you said, for local, how does a state put Bitcoin on the balance sheet when not one municipality in that state holds it on the balance sheet? Because what is a state? It's a collective of cities that pay into a larger, right? It's the next level up. And so, you know what I mean? How does a city look into Bitcoin or facilitate Bitcoin as a payment when not one person in their city is using it as a payment? It doesn't, because without the commitment, you know, anytime there's problems, people are going to go, this is stupid, I'm done. Like, this is dumb, or you're an idiot for doing this thing, I'm done. And so the grassroots education, and another thing I'm very passionate about, and I know you are as well, the narrative as to why Bitcoin was created. It is, in my opinion, the number one attack vector for Bitcoin is the narrative of why. You know, we all love when Larry Fink's talking about Bitcoin because the guy's like runs all the money in the world and he's talking about it. And we're like, yes, but what is he saying when you break it down? You know, he specifically says that Bitcoin is a pristine digital asset. And they focus on the asset. You never hear him saying that it's digital cash or a payment network that can facilitate peer-to-peer money. In reality, you know, every Bitcoiner knows the genesis story, that Bitcoin was born from the financial crisis, that in the Genesis block, right, Chancellor on the brink of a second bailout, there's specific symbolism in Bitcoin as being an instrument where people can just exchange value between each other and hold something that cannot be diluted or extracted as far as what they do. There's never a promise in Bitcoin that Bitcoin was going to go up or be this, but there was a promise that Bitcoin was going to be a way for you to engage in value peer-to-peer without having to ask someone, please, mother, may I do this? Or here's the information of what I'm doing, or I got a slice of pizza with this. So we have to continue to share that story, because Bitcoin's simplest features remain their most impressive features. And I tell people all the time, just hold $10 in self-custody for like a couple months, see what it feels like. Because I remember when I did it, a little like, you know, a goofball like me, I was walking around like, all right. I'm like, okay, hey, how are you doing? What do you got? Like a couple million in the bank? That's cool. That's cool, man. Hope that goes well. You know, like it was the first time I had something of my own of value. And sure, it could go up and go down in a night, but it's mine. And I know the mechanisms, and I can engage in the mechanisms, and I can choose to run a node with a software update of my choice. And I can, you know, look and audit what's going on with Bitcoin, and I can get rid of it at any time if I want. I can hold it. That's the most powerful thing. And it's so simple. It's not like this, like, it's just really simple. You hold something that's yours, and it's not cash under your bed, but like it's better. And you know, we have to continue to tell that story locally, because otherwise that story and the flame that is that story will be extinguished by those that just want to see Bitcoin be, you know, a pristine asset, where in reality, they want to make money. They want dollars. Anything Fink is mentioning about Bitcoin is for the end game of making the United States dollar and getting more of that. So we have to share this. We have to educate folks. And it's the most important thing we can do as Bitcoiners today.
Yeah. And I'm happy to report to all the freaks out there, we do have our first municipality that has adopted a strategic Bitcoin reserve. I was not expecting it to be this municipality. Roswell, wow. Roswell, New Mexico.
Nice.
Is on the board, first snowflake in the eventual avalanche that leads to all municipalities.
That's awesome. They actually used funds to purchase it?
Let me look this up to be sure.
Because I know Fort Worth was the first city to mine it.
Yeah. Roswell, New Mexico. Let's see what it says. Let's see. Bitcoin. I'm pretty sure I saw. I hope I didn't dream this last night. Yeah. Roswell, New Mexico now holds Bitcoin on its balance sheet. Mayor Pro Tem Juliana Halverson signed off on the city's new Bitcoin strategic reserve. It's saying here they have 3,050,323 sats on the balance sheet as of right now. The fair market value of $2,906. It's a step.
It's a step. And it's not going to bankrupt the city, right? 2,900 surely is not going to bankrupt the city. And but they can learn and see, what it's like, what's happening, and they can have growing pains, and they can see what the market does and learn about the technology. And so that's the hardest step, is just getting off zero. And, huge for them. And in 10 years from now, we'll revisit and see what the benefit was. And to other cities, I would say this, Marty, like, even if they were to decide that they never did anything after that, if Bitcoin does change the world like we think it can, and it already has, and continues to move forward, they can say, we looked into this thing. We didn't just we weren't asleep. We looked into this.
Yeah. And I'm just looking into the story in more depth. I saw the headline earlier today, but this is a great way. Like, it's a great example. While we have everybody's attention, this is like a live on air breaking news dissection, but the way in which this Roswell Strategic Reserve and Bitcoin Emergency Fund emerged was an anonymous donation by a citizen of Roswell, New Mexico. So this document acknowledges the city of Roswell, New Mexico's receipt of 3,050,323 Satoshis with a fair market value of roughly $29.06 at the time of receipt as the first seed donation of hopefully many more to come, establishing the city-held and managed Roswell Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. The donation,
that's awesome.
Donation was sent on January 3rd of this year anonymously.
People, some skeptics say Bitcoin's a Ponzi scheme, but I don't know a Ponzi scheme where people donate their funds to a city municipality treasury, just because they believe in the thing and hope that it can. I mean, that would be a first. We'd have to check the history books, but that's an amazing tool. Just someone caring about something so much that they're willing to part ways with real value. That person could have just sold that Bitcoin and bought, an old Honda Accord or something. Although, I don't know what the tariffs, Honda Accords might be going for higher now, but pretty cool. That's an awesome story.
Yeah. Go talk to your municipality, talk to the mayor. This is like, hey, look into Bitcoin. Would you be willing to accept a donation in Bitcoin? Roswell said, yes. You know what? We would. We're going to hold it.
Yeah. Oh, folks have to just get outside and talk to, again, start on your block. Start with the bake sale on the block, and teach them just about Bitcoin. And we have to start there because that's how you plant the seeds. And the good news is there's a lot of folks doing that, and there's starting to be a lot more interest in Bitcoin for sure.
Yeah. Well, you're on the tip of the spear, Dom. Thank you for doing everything that you've done up to this point, and for throwing your hat in the ring for the Board of Trustees of CalPERS. I think it's very important work, sometimes thankless work, and I just want to recognize that it is incredible to see what you've done in a very short amount of time. And anybody who's listening who can put forth an effort to help Dom, his efforts to get on the Board of Trustees at CalPERS, get to work. Let's get this distributed meme warfare underway for the CalPERS Board of Trustees. Let's get to the voters.
100%. We need you out there. If I can plug the website just for folks looking to find us, www.bei for CalPERS. My last name is BEI. So it's Bei for CalPERS. And we on Twitter, you can just look up Dom Bei for CalPERS, or on Instagram. And we got a ton of good endorsements rolling in, and get involved. Like you said, we need everyone. This is not, when the board of a pension board sounds like this little office, you walk into this little place that has a little notepad and you're here on the pension board. Okay. And, but this is a massive thing and it's huge. And my success in both winning the race, but more importantly, engaging people to understand how pensions work and what this means, that depends on all you listening and getting the word out. So anything along those lines, unbelievably huge for us and all the participants and everyone in the country.
We'll link to all that in the show notes. Dom, keep fighting the good fight. And I think we should definitely make it a point to catch up between now and the end of August, when everybody will get their ballots. Anybody in CalPERS will get their ballots, so that we make sure the message continues to get out there.
100%. Hey, thanks for having me on, and thanks for all the work you've done in the space. I've always kept up with your articles, and you've always been willing to lend, insights or a helping hand. So very appreciative of that and all the work you're doing.
I appreciate you. It's a group effort. We're going to win. We're going to win.
Without a doubt, we are. I mean, we're rolling.
We are. With that, peace and love, freaks. Freaks, thank you for listening to the show. I hope you liked it. If you did like it, please make sure you subscribe, rate, review the show. It helps us out a lot. And also, if you like these conversations, I've come to realize that many people listen to the podcast. They don't know we have another sort of layer of this media company. We have the newsletter, the Bitcoin Brief. Go to tfttc.io. Make sure you subscribe there. A lot of the topics that are discussed on this podcast, I write about 5 days a week in the newsletter. We also have the TFTC Elite tier. If you sign up for that, become a member. We have a private Discord server for the elite freaks out there where we're dropping ad-free versions of this show and having discussions about everything we talk about a day early. Logan wanted me to make sure if you want to get the show a day early, become a TFTC Elite member. You will get that. We have our Discord server. Right now it's conversation between myself and TFTC Elite tier members, but we're going to expand that. We'll probably do closed Q&As with people in the industry. I may be doing Macro Mondays. So join us. Go to tfttc.io. Subscribe. Find the button in the top right corner of the website. Become a TFTC Elite member. Thank you for joining us. Okay.